are excited to have you join us for the Come Follow Me 2021 podcast, presented by Gospel Doctrine Answers. This is a special 2-part release for Easter given to the Sisters of Liberty. Where are we in the Book of Mormon timeline? Easter. I am he who liveth, I am he who is slain.
A lot of stuff to cover. Holy cow. So the things that we're going to be talking about, kind of outside of my normal wheelhouse as far as that's concerned. I mean, usually I do, science stuff and Book of Mormon stuff and those kind of things. I've loved looking at the signs of the times and what's going to happen before Christ comes and so forth. That's been something I've always had a deep interest in. Back in 1990, I actually was asked. I was teaching Elders Quorum down in Phoenix, Arizona. They had one lesson on signs of the second coming. And after we did the lesson, I had so much more material, and I said, well, could you do it another week? And it ended up going into 8 weeks. We had half the sisters in the Word coming into the Elders Quorum because it's just everybody's fascinated by this subject. I mean, it really is something that's really pretty amazing. So I'd like to start off with a little video here.
It is a record of ancient America. It is a scripture of the New World, as certainly as the Bible is the scripture of the Old. Each speaks of the other. Each carries with it the spirit of inspiration, the power to convince and to convert. Together they become two witnesses, hand in hand, that Jesus is the Christ, the resurrected and living Son of the living God. Its narrative is a chronicle of nations long since gone, but in its descriptions of today's society, it is as current as the daily newspaper and much more definitive, inspired, and inspiring concerning the solutions of those problems.
Now the scriptures tell us about the war in heaven over free agency, similar to the war we're going through now, where the devil's program was guaranteed security as opposed to the Lord's program of letting each choose for himself, even if he makes the wrong choice. Once you understand these scriptures, you'll understand why the presidents of the church have opposed communism, socialism, and the welfare state. And you see why you must oppose them too, if you're in harmony with the word of the Lord. The scriptures also tell about our inspired Constitution. If you accept these scriptures, you'll automatically reject the counsel of others who depreciate our Constitution. If you use the scriptures as a guide, you know what the Book of Mormon has to say regarding murderous conspiracies in the last day, and how we're to awake to the awful situation today. I find certain elements in the church do not like to see the Book of Mormon and Doctrine and Covenants so much. It has too much to say about freedom.
I know of no other writing which sets forth with such clarity the tragic consequences to societies who follow courses contrary to the commandments of God. Its pages trace the stories of two distinct civilizations that flourished on this Western Hemisphere. They began small, their people walking in the fear of the Lord. But with prosperity came growing evils. The people succumbed to the wiles of ambitious and scheming leaders who oppressed them with burdensome taxes, who lulled them with hollow promises, who countenanced and even encouraged loose and lascivious living, who led them into terrible wars that resulted in the death of millions and the final and total extinction of two great civilizations in two eras.
Now the question arises, what can we do to preserve our Constitution? And how can we avoid being misled into doing those things that will actually help to destroy it? During last October conference, I spoke on the subject, Be Not Deceived. I said there were 3 keys one could use to avoid deception. First, the Scriptures. Second, the words of the prophets, especially the prophet, the president of the church, and particularly the living one. And third, the Holy Ghost.
Now, we have not been using the Book of Mormon as we should. Our homes are not as strong unless we are using it to bring our children to Christ. Our families may be corrupted by the worldly trends and teachings unless we know how to use the book to expose and combat the falsehoods in socialism. Our church classes are not as spirit-filled unless we hold it up as a standard. And our nation will continue to degenerate unless we read and heed the words of the God of this land, Jesus Christ, and quit building up and upholding the secret combinations which the Book of Mormon tells us proved the downfall of both previous American civilizations.
General Moroni, one of the great men of the Book of Mormon, raised the title of liberty, and on it he inscribed these words: "In memory of our God, our religion and freedom, and our peace, our wives and our children." Why didn't he write upon it, "Just live your religion"? There is no need to concern yourselves about your freedom, your peace, your wives, or your children. The reason he didn't was because all these things were a part of his religion as they are of ours. Listen to what the Book of Mormon had to say of the man who raised the title of liberty. "And Moroni was a strong and mighty man. He was a man of perfect understanding, yea, a man that did not delight in bloodshed, a man whose soul did joy in the liberty and the freedom of his country, and his brethren from bondage and slavery. Yea, and he was a man who was firm in the faith of Christ, and he had sworn with an oath to defend his people, his rights, and his country, and his religion, even to the loss of his blood." Unquote. And then Moroni is paid this high tribute. "Yea, verily, verily, I say unto you, if all men had been and were and ever would be like unto Moroni, behold, the very powers of hell would have been shaken forever. Yea, the devil would never have power over the hearts of the children of men." Unquote. Now, part of the reason why we do not have sufficient priesthood bearers to save the Constitution, let alone to shake the powers of hell, is, I fear, because unlike Moroni, our souls do not joy in keeping our country free, and we are not firm in the faith of Christ, nor have we sworn with an oath to defend our rights.
No other written testament so clearly illustrates the fact that when men and nations walk in the fear of God and in obedience to His commandments, they prosper and grow. But when they disregard Him and His word, there comes a decay that, unless otherwise arrested by righteousness, leads to impotence and death. The Book of Mormon is an affirmation of the Old Testament proverb, "Righteousness exalteth a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people."
The Book of Mormon has declared over and over again, the blessings of heaven are contingent upon the righteousness of its people. In fact, this teaching has been attested to in almost every age. Remember in 1831 when the famous French historian said, "I sought for the greatness and genius of America in her commodious harbors and her ample rivers, and it was not there. In her fertile fields and boundless prairies, and it was not there. In her rich mines and her vast world of commerce, and it was not there. Not until I went to the churches of America and heard her pulpits aflame with righteousness did I understand her genius and power. America is great because she is good. If America ever ceases to be good, America will cease to be great.
So I want to start off first off with Elder Jeffrey R. Holland, and this is a talk that he gave about 2.5-3 years ago, called the Greatness of the Evidence. He said it should be noted that truly rock-ribbed faith and uncompromised conviction comes with its most complete power when it engages our head as well as our heart. And so, so a lot of times we get emotionally involved with this, but also we need to take a look at, so what does the Scriptures say, and what can we know, logically as well. Making our case for the restored gospel of Jesus Christ, he says, I believe that God intends us to find and use the evidence he has given. Reasons, if you will, which affirm the truthfulness of his work. So if there's evidence, if God is going to give us evidence to show us when the times are happening, then I think we should use that evidence, Like those converted Lamanites, we may with bold conviction hold up to a world that desperately needs it the greatness of the evidences which we've received, especially of the truthfulness of the Book of Mormon, the keystone of our religion. So to start off, now, if you've been following our work for some time, you already know about the information about how the promised lands are, so I'm going to really blast through that part so we can get down to kind of the meat of the subject for today, which basically you start off with Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, right? And there was a promised land. Where was the first recorded land of promise? You should all know this maybe by now. Does anybody know where that's located? What scriptures? So where is the first recorded land of promise in the Scriptures? It's actually not in the Old Testament. It's actually in the Pearl of Great Price in Moses. And in chapter 6, verse 17, says that Enos, who was a grandson of Adam, he lived 90 years and begat Canaan, and Enos and the residue of the people of God came out of the land called Shulon and dwelt in this land of promise, which he called after his own son, whose name was Canaan. So the original land of promise was named after Canaan, which is Adam's great-grandson, right? So where was this promised land? Well, where was the Garden of Eden located? Missouri, basically, right? So when Adam and Eve were expelled from the Garden of Eden, did they stay there, or did they travel thousands of miles away to other continents? Well, for the answer to that, we actually have to go to Scripture, and this is in section 107, the Doctrine and Covenants. It says that 3 years before he died, Adam called Seth, Enos, Canaan, Mahalalel, Jared, Enoch, and Methuselah into the valley of Adam-on-the-Ammon. So how old was Adam when he died? Like 930 years old. So this is 927 years after they've been kicked out of the Garden of Eden. Okay, they're still there in this place called Adam-on-the-Ammon. And just in case you're looking for a sign, whoop, there's your sign. Okay, so there's, boom. So if you want to know where the Garden of Eden is located, where the Adam-on-the-Ammon is located, then this is the church's official sign there. And this is the valley of Adam-on-the-Ammon. And this is the scripture that backs it up. Basically says Spring Hill is named by the Lord, Adam-on-the-Ammon, and it's in Spring Hill in Davies County, Missouri. So do we know this by speculation or by revelation? It's a revelation from the Lord, right? So we know where this is located. This is not in question. And now we know that Adam basically remained there in that area for basically at least 927 years. Because that was where he had all of his sons come back to receive this special blessing. So this is Spring Hill, Adam-on-the-Ammon, again by the church. So this is Canaan, and this is the first land of promise, right? So what was the promise? The promise is basically this. If you be righteous, then you get to stay on this promised land. If you become wicked, then I can't allow you to remain on this special land. So we get down to the time of Noah, and what's happening to the people? They're in a state of apostasy. They've forgotten about this promise, this covenant. And so God calls a prophet by the name of Noah, and he builds an ark. And he basically takes the ark from here in America. So the ark would have been built where? Yeah, basically in America here somewhere, okay? Although I do know about the ideas of being in San Pete as well, but bottom line is it ended up where? the mountains of Ararat in Turkey, on the other side of the earth, basically, right? There have been those even within the church. In fact, LDS Living had an article that was written by one of our scholars, basically, and he said that Noah's flood probably wasn't even a real event. It was probably just a hypothetical event, or symbolic event. It might have been a local flood, but there's no way, basically, it was an actual full-on worldwide event. Which, if that's a local flood, brothers and sisters, and he ended up in Turkey, that is one heck of a local flood, going from America to Turkey. Okay, so that's a long ways away. I don't buy that for an instant. So bottom line is that this is the area where Noah's posterity, he had Ham, Shem, and Japheth, right? And Ham was married to Egyptus. They became they came here into Africa. They became basically the black race. Then they had Shem. He had the priesthood, and Japheth was blessed by Noah that his seed would exceed all, and they became the Asiatic peoples of the earth. So this is how that kind of broke up. If you follow Shem's line down, you have Abraham, who has a son by the name of Isaac, and because of Abraham's unflinching obedience to God, he is given a special covenant with God, right? And that covenant involves several things. Does it matter where places happen? Does it matter where this happened? Where did it happen? Where did it happen? Where did Abraham go to sacrifice Isaac? Mount Moriah. Where's Mount Moriah? Actually, technically it may not be, but it's in this general region right here. It's pretty close. We're going to talk about that a little bit later, because that goes into some real important things when it comes down to the reestablishment of the daily sacrifice of the Jews. Okay, but that's basically where most of the world thinks it is. And what was this covenant that God made with Abraham? He would bless him with the land, posterity, prosperity, and security. Those four things. Now, how many of you have heard that part already? This part. Okay, how many of you have not heard this part before? This is new for you. How many of you are not voting? Are we all still awake here? No, okay. Anyway, so basically the land itself, posterity, prosperity, and security. It's actually kind of given in that order, okay, according to the Abrahamic covenant. So if you're going to have, what was the purpose of the covenant? Basically, there's actually, I'll go back to that real quickly. The purpose of the covenant basically is this. God told Abraham, he says, through thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, even with the blessings of the gospel, right? So that was Abraham's seed's responsibility to take the gospel to all the rest of his children. So all of Ham's children, all of Japheth's children, and also all of the additional, the people who were between Shem and Israel, right? Or Abraham. So the bottom line is he has a huge responsibility in order to be effective in having this missionary work, because that's really what it's all about. In order to be effective in doing this missionary work, you're going to need a land. Why do you need a land? Because you need to have an ability to create a culture of righteousness. The Israelites could not have a culture of righteousness as they lived in Egypt, for example, because Egypt wouldn't allow them to practice their religion, right? We had the same problem in Missouri, right? So we ended up coming out here to Salt Lake City. So the bottom line is that sometimes God has to remove them from a culture of unrighteousness and put them into a place where they can actually establish it so that their children, and they can live their religion the way that they want to live it. So a land is important. Posterity is important because the gospel is spread heart to heart and spirit to spirit. So if you're going to have a powerful missionary force, you need to have missionaries, right? And then third, if you're going to have a powerful missionary force, you're going to have some prosperity, because missionary work is expensive. And not everybody can do it. So God says, I'm going to bless you with all the prosperity that you need to be able to carry out the goal, basically, of having missionary work. And then the fourth thing is security. Because even if you have the first three, if you don't have the last one, if those kids are basically having to serve military instead of missions, you see the problem? So God says, I'll take care of that too. I'm going to put a shield, an iron dome of protection over that covenant land and that covenant people as long as they're on that land. And as long as they are righteous, I'll fight their battles for them. So they don't even have to do that. They can totally focus and concentrate on taking my gospel to all my other kids. Right? So God also blessed Abraham and his posterity. Basically, this gets down to Abraham, who has Isaac, who has Jacob. Jacob has how many sons? 12 sons. Those 12 sons basically take that promised land of Canaan. By the way, it was named Canaan, right? And they divide it up. But there was a couple of sons who didn't get an inheritance. Who were they? Levi didn't get it. That's right. In fact, right here, the tribe of Levi in Deuteronomy says, the priests, the Levites, and all the tribe of Levi shall have no part nor land inheritance with Israel. They shall eat the offerings of the Lord made by fire in his inheritance. Therefore they shall have no inheritance among their brethren. The Lord is their inheritance, and he hath said unto them. So basically, they were to get the temple. So the Levites didn't get any. But if you go back to this, who else didn't get an inheritance? It's Joseph. But see, people say, well, wait a minute, Joseph got a double inheritance because both of his sons got an inheritance. Both Ephraim and Manasseh both got an inheritance. But Joseph didn't get one. Why is that? I thought Joseph was the good one. I mean, wasn't he the good guy? Okay. Why didn't he get an inheritance? Okay, where is his inheritance? It was a promised land. It was above every other land. In the whole world, his was going to be the best promised land because he was the good one. Okay, so bottom line is it was America. But he didn't get an inheritance over here in the old world. So now you have basically they divide up. They can't get along very well. So the southern kingdom and the northern kingdom, they split up. The 10 tribes in the north and the 2 remaining tribes in the south. And then they get the northern tribes begin to forget about God and ignore this covenant that God made with Abraham. And according to Isaiah, what happened is that, and this is what actually happened in history, is basically you have the Assyrians came down and attacked the northern tribes of Israel. And at first they actually repelled them and they drove them back out of their lands, and then they bragged about it. And this is how Isaiah basically put down in words how their attitude was in regard to this attack. So he said, the bricks are falling down, but we're going to build with hewn stones. The sycamores are cut down, but we're going to change them into cedars. Now, a brick is not as good a material as a hewn stone. But they're saying is that when the Assyrians came down, they destroyed their houses. They literally would hook up with their horses and pull down the walls of their homes, so forth. They said, you know what? We're not going to just rebuild. We're going to rebuild with a vengeance. We're going to rebuild with this boastfulness, basically, that we are Israel and we are awesome and we are not going to be knocked down, and we're going to show the world how great we are. Because we're going to rebuild, not only just rebuild, we're going to rebuild bigger and better and badder than we were before. And so that's what they basically did. They said, we're not going to just build with bricks next time. We're going to build hewn stones. Now, a hewn stone is a better material than a brick is, right? And a cedar tree goes taller and straighter than the sycamore trees. The sycamore trees are the trees that God gave them to work with. But they're going to have imports. They're going to import cedar trees instead, because they think that's better than what God gave them. And then, of course, we know what happened about 7 years later. The Assyrians came back again a second time. This time it didn't go so well for the northern tribe of Israel. And the northern tribes were driven dramatically off of their covenant and promised land. And that covenant promised land was given to them for how long? Forever, according to the Lord himself. So this covenant actually is with the people, but it's also on the real estate itself. Is that still a covenant land? Yes, it is. Whether or not the people are there, it depends on them and their righteousness. Okay, so the Assyrian Empire, basically, they drive off the northern tribes of Israel. Where do they go? They went to the north countries, right? And we don't know a lot about where they went, but we do know some of where they went. We know for sure that some of them went over into basically what is now Russia and that area. Some of them went into what is now Europe and that area. And some of them went someplace where we don't even know where they went. But a vast majority of them probably are not even here among us. And we're going to talk about that just a little bit more. Those of you here a few weeks ago when we had the presentation about the rocks with the rocks and stuff, okay, that's an important baseline understanding to be able to understand some of the things we're going to be talking about a little bit later in this presentation. So, all right. So Lehi and was called out of the southern part, right? He was a southerner, okay. And so the Lord calls his prophet Lehi out. He gives him a special instrument to be able to be led out with, and they leave right around 600 BC, right? But at 586 BC, which is just a few years later, 14 years later, this time not the Assyrians, but the Babylonians come in, and they attack the southern tribes of Israel, and they basically conquer them, and they haul them back as slaves back to Babylon. And this is under King Nebuchadnezzar. Okay, and basically, so as they do this, so let me ask you a question. How many people are now remaining on the promised land of the Lord given to Abraham and his posterity forever? Yeah, they're gone. So God cannot allow wicked people to remain on promised lands. It just can't happen. This is in the same way that Adam and his posterity were on this promised land, and then they all got basically wiped out by the flood. Here we have the children of Israel. They're on a promised land, and they all get basically wiped out by their neighboring cultures. And then we're going to see in the Book of Mormon two additional examples of people who become wicked on a promised land. And who are they? It's the Jaredites and the Nephites, right? Okay, we're going to talk about that in some depth. So anyway, this is the captivity routes here. How many promised lands are there? Are there dozens of them? The answer to that, I turn to the ultimate authority on promised lands. And you know who that is? That's Jesus Christ. Okay. And when he's with the Nephites, this is what he said, according to 3 Nephi chapter 20. He says, I will remember the covenant which I made with my people. I have covenanted with them that I would gather them together in my own due time, give unto them again the land of their fathers for their inheritance, which is what? The land of Jerusalem, which is the promised land unto them for how long?
Forever.
Okay, so here's Jesus Christ basically saying that Jerusalem is the promised land for his people forever. And they're not even there at this point, at that point in time. So this is Jerusalem. This is where the promised land is. This is the covenant gathering place for the house of Israel, right? Now this is Jerusalem. So this is Canaan over here. This is Canaan over here. And this is Jerusalem's over here. But then Christ said this in the same chapter here in the Book of Mormon. He says, behold, this people will I establish in this land. Well, what land is he in?
America.
He's in America, right? And we think he's in the United States of America, basically this land. Unto the fulfilling of this covenant, which I made with your father Jacob, and it, meaning this land, shall be a what? A new Jerusalem. So now we know, New Jerusalem, Jerusalem, Canaan, Canaan. Does anybody see a pattern developing here? These are the two promised lands. I want you to find that also. We're going to get into this a little bit more a little bit later on. But notice that their juxtaposition basically here, or not juxtaposition, they basically, this one is on one side of the earth, and this one is actually on the other side of the earth. If you actually wrap this around a globe, Israel is almost always in nighttime when the United States is in daytime. That's kind of an interesting thing. You have two promised lands. One of them is always in the light, while the other one is in the darkness. Okay? Except for when interesting things happen. And we're going to get into that a little bit in a minute. So these are the lands of promise. These are the covenant lands. Now, there's a whole scripture chase thing, or scripture chain thing, I should say, that we do. Typically, I've got us down to basically 1 or 2 slides here to keep it short. But this is from Alma chapter 46. It said, and it came to pass that when he had poured out his soul to God, he named all the land which was south of the land desolation, yea, and find all the land both on the north and on the south, a chosen land, and the land of liberty. This land of liberty is understood more clearly when we understand that Missouri, USA is where the New Jerusalem is going to be built. That is also the Zion that is talked about. This is the land of promise in the Book of Mormon. It's this land of the Book of Mormon. It's a choice land. It's the land of liberty, and all of those things link up. So bottom line, that the promised land is America, right? It's the United States. Is there any difference between freedom and liberty? This is going to be important here in just a minute. I have usually gone to a lot more explanation, but I'm just going to go to the simplest definition, the best definition. We could go into Noah Webster's dictionary and so forth, and he actually got it right, surprisingly. But the clearest definition I've ever seen of the difference between freedom and liberty is actually from the Book of Mormon itself. In 2 Nephi chapter 2, it says, "Wherefore men are free according to the flesh. By virtue of having been born, we're free." Okay? And we're free to choose. Choice number 1, liberty and eternal life to the great mediator of all men, or to choose choice number 2, captivity and death. So what is the difference between freedom and liberty? Freedom gives us the ability to choose. Liberty is the choice to follow God. And that's the difference. Why is that important? Because in our founding fathers, when they, we haven't been able to find a single solitary instance of any of the founding fathers calling this a land of freedom. What did they always call it? A land of liberty. And what does that mean? That means that we as a nation choose God. We choose to follow God. That's what that means. Freedom basically can be construed as anarchy. Because when everybody can do anything they want to, then that's not good. So freedom in and of itself is important, but the most important thing is when you choose to use your freedom to follow God, and that's called liberty. Okay? So this is a quote by Elder L. Tom Perry. He says, the United States is the promised land foretold in the Book of Mormon. So I love that. He actually gave this talk about 2 months after he received one of my books for Christmas that talks about the United States being the promised land. This is done up in BYU, Idaho, and then it was actually ended up in the Ensign later on that year, in 2012. So again, what was this covenant that God made with Abraham? I want you to repeat this with me, okay? So the first thing is the land. Second thing is? Prosperity. Then what? Prosperity. And then? Okay. The reason why I want you to do that is because I want you to get this in your mind, because when a nation begins to reject God and ignore him and forget about this covenant, God cannot continue to bless them with these blessings. And what he does, scripturally speaking, is he always does this. He removes those blessings. He revokes those blessings, and he always does it in reverse order. What does that mean? That means you have phase 1, the blessing of security. If the people reject him, he has to basically give them a little bit of a loving nudge back to him, right? By having a breach of their security. So usually that means some kind of an incursion or whatever. And they realize that God's shield of protection, he's not protecting us anymore. Okay? So the shield of protection has been removed. And that gets people's attention. Like, ooh, that doesn't feel so secure anymore. But if they continue on their road to rejection and apostasy, then he has to go to removing their covenant of prosperity. And usually that means, for example, in the Book of Mormon, they talked about how their riches became slippery and nobody could hold on to their riches, right, their money, okay? So you have a financial issue, because when you take away people's money, it gets their attention, okay? But sometimes they still just don't get it, and so they basically God has to go to what I call phase 3. Phase 3 is the revocation of the covenant of posterity. And usually that means war and people are going to die. Okay? So in previous cultures and previous civilizations, that's what it meant. So you basically have a depopulation going on. And then the fourth thing, if they still refuse to follow God and live up to their end of the covenant, then God has no other choice but to sweep them off the land. So that's phase 4, the swept off the land part, right? Okay, so when you understand that, then it's really fascinating. Anybody know what this document is we're looking at here? It's the Constitution, and specifically it's the beginning part of it called the preamble, right? And I want you to I'm going to just go through the preamble really quickly here, and I want you to just tell me, can you find the 4 parts of that sacred covenant with Abraham embedded in the preamble of the Constitution of the United States? Basically, it says, we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, to ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. But I almost want to say amen at the end. Okay? You see it? Do you see all the parts of the covenant? It's all in there. It talks about the nation, the land, the United States of America. It talks about posterity. They want to secure these blessings for their posterity, prosperity. They talked about justice and their general welfare, security, common defense, domestic tranquility. And they sought these blessings by an ordination. And brothers and sisters, what is a ordination? It's a contract between who? Man and God, right? So this is a contract written in the preamble of the founding document of our nation. Between who again? Between us and God. Was this document inspired? Well, who actually is the one that takes credit for this? Who did the Constitution? I mean, who should get credit for it? Was it Jefferson or Benjamin Franklin, John Adams? Well, I'll tell you who does take credit for it. None of those guys. You know who takes credit for it? The Lord does. In Doctrine and Covenants section 101, verse 80 says, and for this very purpose have I, who's speaking here? The Lord, established the constitution of this land by the hands of wise men whom I, the Lord, raised up unto this very purpose. So here, the Lord's totally taking credit for the Constitution. Okay? And he should. So what is the obligation associated with this covenant? I mean, obviously, if it's a covenant, it's a two-way thing, right? So he says, I'm going to bless you with the land, prosperity, and security. But a covenant's a two-way street. What do we have to give back in return? Well, number one, we have to take the gospel to the other nations of the earth, right? Because that's the mandate, okay? But there's something else that we have to do. As a nation, we have to do this. Yeah, it's just one thing. But that one thing is divided into 10 sub-things. Okay? That's it. Keep the commandments. That's it. The people in the nation don't have to all be full tithing payers. They don't have to all be, temple recommend holders. They just have to live the minimum standard, which is what? The 10 Commandments. And as long as they will live the minimum standard, then all of the blessings are theirs. God cannot withhold any blessings from these people that are living the 10 Commandments. So what are the 10 Commandments? I mean, do we even know them anymore? Hardly. There's been a war against the 10 Commandments going on now for probably 30 years. But there's some really interesting things like, thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. How are we doing as a nation and obeying that commandment? Okay? Or how about keeping the Sabbath day holy? We're doing pretty good with that, aren't we? No. How about thou shalt not kill? No. Well, unless they're not born yet, then it's okay. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not bear false witness. Thou shalt not covet. As a nation, are we living the minimum standard anymore? No. I think you're right. And what happens to nations who refuse to live the minimum standard? They go through that process, right? So this is George Washington on the day of his inauguration in 1789. This was held where? In Washington, D.C.? New York. It was in New York, okay? And this is according to the historical sources. They basically brought out the Gideon Bible. They brought it out there. He put his hand, opened it up. He opened it up specifically to a verse, according to historians, in Genesis. Genesis chapter 49. And some of you may already know this, but basically it's pretty cool. This is, he said, Joseph is a fruitful bough, even a fruitful bough by a well, whose branches run over the wall. So, what is that? Who is Joseph? Where's his land? America. His promised land is America. He went over the wall, over the ocean, and this is his land. And interestingly enough, several of the founding fathers actually talked about, one day there will be a new Jerusalem on this land. Because they understood this is the land of Joseph. This is the inheritance that Joseph got, the most righteous of the 12 sons. And where did this actually take place? Do places matter again? I mentioned that before with that, but this actually matters. This is the St. Paul Cathedral, downtown New York. Now, at the time when George Washington invoked this covenant with God, by the way, how do you know he was invoking a covenant? Where's his hand? His left hand on the verse, according to historical sources, right hand forming a square, which is what are you doing when you're doing that? You're making a covenant with who? Okay. So here's George Washington as the first rightful president of the new United States of America, making a covenant and putting our nation under this covenant with God. And what is the covenant? It's basically the same as the Abrahamic covenant. It's the same covenant that was here with Adam and Eve and their posterity. Right? He's re-invoking this covenant anew or afresh. And so this is the St. Paul Cathedral here. Now, interestingly enough, historians have gone back and looked at it, and back in the time when this actually happened, his inauguration, the church actually, the St. Paul Cathedral actually owned, I can't remember, 4 or 5 acres of land right around the church area. Later on, the church ended up selling off some of that land. It got sold, I think, a couple more times. And long story short, basically, is that the land was eventually purchased by a group who wanted to build the new icon of America on that piece of property. They wanted to build the tallest building in the New York skyline. It would actually be the tallest building on earth at the time. But we're America. And building just one of them isn't good enough. We're going to build 2 of them. And we're going to make them look exactly alike. And so they did. And so they began to build, and they actually, you can see the St. Paul Cathedral. This is the spire here. It's kind of an interesting spire. Viewed from another angle, you can see the spire here. What are these 2 big buildings here? The Twin Towers were literally built on the piece of real estate that was owned by the church at the time of the inauguration. So at the time that George Washington placed our nation under a covenant with God, he was standing on the very piece of ground that would ultimately have this happen. Where not just one, but both of these towers were brought low to the dust, right? And really one of the very first ever attacks on the United States on our own soil. Now, whether it was an internal attack or an external attack, it doesn't matter. It was an attack, okay? The bottom line is that both of these towers, the icon of America was brought down. And so they decided, you know what, this was a horrible event. Obviously, all of us, it was just devastating to see this going on. But they had actually, within 24 hours, you had the mayor of New York, the governor of New York, and the Speaker of the House and so forth, and they all joined in a chorus basically saying, we are America, and we are not going to let this bring us down. We are not going to be humbled by this. And in fact, we're going to rebuild. In fact, we're going to rebuild bigger and taller than we did before. We're going to show the world that we are America and we are awesome. And nowhere in there is this part about humbling ourselves before God, because this is a sign. This is a very big sign that God's covenant of protection over this nation is over. The shield of protection has been protecting this nation for its entire time. It has basically been revoked. It's been removed, right? Okay? And so this is what they said. Actually, most of them this is called the Isaiah prophecy. And they actually brought this up. They said the bricks are falling down, but we're going to build with hewn stones. The sycamores are cut down, but we're going to change them into cedar trees. They actually said this over and over and over again. Basically, again, invoking Isaiah, saying we're going to rebuild and we're going to rebuild better. Not realizing that Isaiah's real covenant is to show how the Israelites basically had not humbled themselves before God. And so what happened to them 7 years later? They got driven completely off their lands. So this is what's going on here. Now this is the Twin Towers right here. You can see down below here the plaza. This is a little closer view of the plaza. This is actually kind of a close-up view of the plaza here. What are these things down here made out of? These are called pavers, right? What are pavers? They're bricks, basically. They're man-made, right? They make them into bricks and so forth, right? That's what the plaza looked like after the towers came down. The bricks had been thrown down, folks. The bricks are completely in disarray. And interestingly enough, when they got into after the kind of the smoke and everything cleared out and all the dust and everything cleared out, they went in. They thought, the church, there's no hope. I mean, clearly, the church would have been completely knocked down. It was literally, that church sits right at the base of the North Tower, within not even half a block away. Just the sheer blast wave from the collapsing building caused doors and windows and walls to be blasted out of buildings on all sides of the stone church, the St. Paul Cathedral. But they were absolutely amazed and astounded by the fact that when they got in there, the stone church was undamaged. Not even any windows blasted out or any of that kind of stuff. Couple of tiles got blown off the roof, but that was about it. And they started looking for how in the world did it possibly make it? And they said, well, the only thing we can think of is there was a line of really old big trees that stood between the church and the tower. Can I get a drink of water? Oh, yeah. I'm getting so parched I can hardly. Okay, sorry. Colette, appreciate that. Anyway, but they had this line of old trees, and apparently when the blast wave came down, it hit those old trees so hard it actually ripped some of them right up out of the ground by their roots. But it caused the blast wave to slow down or go over the church, and the church was completely saved by these old trees. In fact, if you take a close look, you can see there's a trunk of one that's laying sideways, and you can see the big root ball sticking up right here. Oh, thank you. You see that? So that one actually got completely blasted all the way over on its side. So, that's interesting. So this is actually the courtyard, so you can see the old tombstones here in the courtyard of the church there. All right. Then they decided that, we have to, this is in 2004, so just a couple of years later. They said we need to honor and remember those who lost their lives on September 11th, 2001 as a tribute to the enduring spirit of what? Freedom. Because now they decided to use this as the new foundation stone for the new tower, which they called the what tower? Freedom Tower. The Freedom Tower. Now wait a minute. How many of you realized by calling it the Freedom Tower, that was a direct affront to God? What it's saying loud and clear is our new building, our tallest skyscraper, the one that was now going to be the iconic structure of America. We are not under your law. We are free to choose, and we choose not to be. This is the Freedom Tower. They didn't call it the Liberty Tower, did they? But yet we have in the harbor in New York, we have this statue holding up a torch, and she's called the what tower? The statue of. We have this bell in Philadelphia, and it's called the what bell? Liberty Bell. Yeah. It's not a freedom bell. It's a liberty bell. We choose God. This says we don't choose God. We're free. Then they also had the sculptor that made this wonderful sculpture here on the bottom of Wall Street, basically showing the mangled roots as they were torn up out of the ground of these old trees. And then they said, you know what, we need to memorialize the fact that these trees saved the old church. And so it was on November 22nd of 2003, somebody donated a 20-foot Norway spruce to the church, and they call it the Tree of Hope. They dug a hole right where one of the oldest, biggest trees were that actually took the brunt of it, and they dug a hole there to plant this tree in its place. By the way, I didn't point this out really, but what kind of a tree is that? Sycamore. It's a sycamore tree. And what kind of trees are we replacing it with? A cedar tree. So where the sycamore was, they're now planting a cedar tree in its place, just like the Isaiah covenant, right? Unfortunately, though, about a year later, they had to come and remove the tree because the tree of hope, as they called it, died. It didn't make the transfer, the transplant. It's not a good sign when your tree of hope dies, right? Okay. On the top of the Washington Monument, this is what is inscribed up there on the top of this capstone, at the very tippy top of the Washington Monument. And on it says, you can't see it very well, but it's called Laus Deo, or basically, God be with us, or God hear us. That is what they wanted to have on the highest point that will ever be in Washington, D.C. There will never be any buildings built higher than the Washington Monument. That's why if you go to Washington, D.C., there's almost no really skyscrapers like there is in New York and Chicago and so forth. Because by law, no one can ever build a building taller than the Washington Monument, because this is supposed to be the tallest thing, the closest thing to God in Washington, D.C. God be with us. That's what they wanted. But on the new tower, the new Freedom Tower, they had a big ceremony. They had President Obama came out, and they asked him, sign something significant on the toppest beam, the highest beam in the new tower. We want you to sign something on there symbolically, whatever. So what does he write? He says, we remember, we rebuild, we come back stronger. The Isaiah Covenant, again. Written by the hand of the President of the United States on the new icon of America. This is not a good omen, folks. Okay. So this is the new Freedom Tower. More today. Okay. And now, so that was in 2001. What kind of a sign do you think that is? If you take a look at those 4 blessings of the covenant, okay, what would the tower coming down be a sign of? The revocation of the covenant of security, protection, right? So that's phase 1. This is basically God telling us as a nation, if you're looking for the signs, you'll see these signs. But basically, I have to revoke the covenant of security. I've removed the iron dome, the shield of protection over this nation, and you are now going to be on your own, unless you repent and turn back to me, which I don't see happening since then, right? For a while we did, but actually it came back pretty fast. So then, all of you know what a Shemitah year is, because you've all been well educated with other speakers. So a Shemitah cycle, 7-year cycles used by the Lord in his Hebrew calendar system that he basically outlined for the Hebrews, right? Okay, so the 7 years is a really important thing, and that's going to be real important as we get down to the signs of the times of today, because the 7-year thing is real critical to understand. Okay, so the 7 years cycle basically is this: every 7 years, if I owed Colette money, if she owed me money, it would just be forgiven, but also.
Don't go any further than that.
Okay, right here.
In front of the screen and it kind of crops off.
Okay, okay, yeah. So basically, so there's a forgiveness there, but also, see, we all have our weekly Sabbath, so we have 6 days to work and we have a week to rest, right? But what about the earth? Did the earth need a Sabbath? Yes. Yeah, Adam and Eve created the earth for 6 days, and what did he do on the 7th day? The earth rested. And so as a memorial to that, every 7th year, they're not supposed to plant or harvest. And they can kind of harvest what comes up naturally, but they're not supposed to basically work the earth and let the earth have its Sabbath. Okay, so these 7-year cycles are real important, okay? And the bottom line is that 7 years after 9/11, you have 2008. What happened in the fall of 2008? Almost to the day of 9/11. The largest stock market crash in U.S. history, right? And it's interesting because the stock market in 2008 occurred on September 29, 2008. The Dow Jones Industrial Average fell 777 points. What is significant about that? The number 7 is the number for judgment in Hebrew lexicon, basically. So 777 means judgment, judgment, judgment. Wow, that's a little intense. Okay. So the stock market crash of 2008, by the way, now we've had bigger stock market crashes since then, and the stock market right now is just like at all-time highs, right? So who cares about this? Well, what is the purpose of it? The purpose, brothers and sisters, is it's a sign. It's a sign. It's not saying that this is now the end of the prosperity part, right? But it's the sign that is about to happen, or it is in the process of happening. Is there anything that indicates that 2008 was in fact a worse than we thought of? It's much worse than just a stock market crash? What would we look for if we were trying to see how is America doing financially? What's one of the ways you can find out? You look at the gross debt, right? If you want to know how you're doing financially, how much debt do you have? That's going to be an important question, right? Okay. So how much debt does America have? Well, if you take a look at the national debt, this is the total public debt. And by the way, I am going to fix that. It's kind of driving me nuts that my slides are not quite fitting on the screen there. So just give me 1 second here. Let's get it down here. Okay, there we go. Okay, that's better. So if you take a look at this, so this is 1982 right here, right? So where were we at then? And this is 2008, right? So it comes along here, and then you have 2006, 2008 is basically right here. Did anybody see a change in the overall direction? Okay, now this one only goes up to about 2011, 2012. This one goes up to 2015. Do you see where 2008 falls? Right here. At 2008, things are going like this, and now all of a sudden it's going like this. What has the national debt done since then? Has it gotten better or worse?
Worse.
Exponentially worse. They don't even talk about it anymore. It's so bad. There's basically no way that we can ever repay it. What happens when you get to that point in your own life to where you have so much debt that you cannot repay it? You have to have a reset, right? That's interesting. What's been being talked about lately?
A reset.
A bankruptcy. All right. How the national debt has grown. Again, this is 2008. You can see again, that, I mean, in just about every chart you look at, if you're looking at the national debt, 2008 is the place, the fulcrum point where basically it goes from this trajectory to this trajectory, and it's pretty much across the board. 7 years later, I got to stop for just a second. So 7 years later, there were those. Now, I have to give some credit here where credit is due. Jonathan Cahn, if you ever heard of Jonathan Cahn, he's a Messianic Jew, basically, has a huge group out in by Washington, D.C. area. Or I guess it's closer by New York, anyway. Yeah, New Jersey. But anyway, but he's the one that actually found a lot of this information I'm sharing with you right now is to happen. In 2015, though, he made all kinds of predictions, basically, that we are going to have a financial meltdown. We're going to have, the economy is going to completely fall apart in 2015. It's another 7-year cycle. And 2015 came and went, and what happened? Nothing. There was no meltdown. Everything seemed to be fine. He had a little bit of kind of egg on his face, and the only reason why is because he was looking for the wrong sign. If we have the understanding of the land, posterity, prosperity, and security, phase 1, revocation of the covenant of security, revocation of the covenant of prosperity. So what's the next one? Posterity. So is there anything that happened that would affect the posterity of the United States of America that happened in basically the fall of 2015?
Gay marriage.
Same-sex marriage. Now, no matter what the position is on same-sex marriage, the bottom line is that going to affect how many children are going to be created? Absolutely it will. But not only that, so you had the Supreme Court really makes same-sex marriage a right nationwide. It's a big yay from the New York Times. And then this is then the Senate votes the Senate vote to defund Planned Parenthood fails. So they were going to defund Planned Parenthood, but apparently our gutless, some of our gutless Congress people basically decided to go ahead and refund Planned Parenthood, which by their own admission, somewhere around 30 million children will never have an opportunity to take their first breath on the promised land of America. Yeah, in the past, God has had to bring in other nations and create war and so forth to reduce the population, basically. In our case, God doesn't even need to do it. We're killing our own kids. So he doesn't even need to bring in another nation to kill us. We're already busy doing it. But we do it very sterilely, see. So we don't see it happening every day, but every day thousands of children across this nation are are brutally killed. So Senate votes down plan to strip Planned Parenthood funds. And what is the reaction to that? That's the sign. So what is the reaction to the sign? What happens after God makes the sign happen? Then you basically take a look and see what happens after that, right? Well, what happened after that? Well, U.S. fertility rate is now at the lowest point since records began in 1909. They said that America's birth rate is now a national emergency. U.S. fertility rate reaches a new record low. Babies are not being created, and those that are being created, many of them are being killed. So we have a really a shortage of children going on here. If it wasn't for immigration, we would actually be below sustainment levels. You have to have 2.1 children per couple just to maintain a population. And basically, brothers and sisters, I'm telling you, Stephen Smoot, my dear friend Stephen Smoot, he did a couple of videos called the Demographic Bomb and Demographic Winter. And in this, he has some of the top people in the world. And he said, basically, there has never, ever been any civilization that has prospered at the same time as they have depopulation. There is a direct correlation to the wealth of a nation and its ability to have children. Simple as that. And they can show it in every kind of demographic. I mean, it doesn't matter what it is. And they think they can show that. In fact, it was his film that actually ultimately, it was shown at the United Nations. And then they actually ended up showing it to China. He got a bunch of them to the Chinese leaders. And that's when, after they saw that film, they realized that they have made a huge mistake, killing all the babies, and they actually changed the one-child policy after seeing that film. Yes. That film, well, I mean, there's not just that one thing. I mean, it's obviously it's a whole bunch of things, but it was one of the big catalysts that really caused the Chinese to go, we're making a huge mistake here. Which also brings us to another issue. If you have been killing all of the kids except for one per family, and your culture basically says that you don't have really a posterity unless you have a male, progenitor, right, or whatever, right? So who's getting killed the most? The girl babies. So now they have something in the neighborhood of, I think it was 30 million young men that will never have an opportunity to have a family or be married. What do you do with 30 million frustrated young men? You make a powerful army. Okay, so just saying. And those kids now are all adults and so forth now, right? So this is Mormon chapter 8. I think this is really important because in the Book of Mormon, essentially, people need to realize that this Book of Mormon is so precious for us, for our day, to understand what's going on. In the video that I showed at the beginning, President Hinckley said that the Book of Mormon is more current than the daily news. And for a little bit, I was kind of going, wait a minute, how could the Book of Mormon be more current than the daily news, which, if something happens in Indonesia, we know about it in 2 minutes on our phone, right? So how could a 2,000-year-old book be more current than that? And I finally realized the reason why President Hinckley is absolutely right is because the news can only tell us what has happened. The Book of Mormon can tell us what's going to happen. How could the Book of Mormon know this? Well, he actually tells us, Mormon does. Actually, technically, this is Moroni speaking here. It's in Mormon chapter 8, but the beginning of the chapter he says, now I, Moroni, do make a statement or whatever. So he's talking about this, but he says, behold, I speak unto you as if you were present, yet you were not. But behold, Jesus Christ has shown you unto me, and I know your doing. What is that? What is that? This Jesus Christ has shown you unto me, and I know your doing. So who showed him? The Lord did, right? Why would this be important? Because these were the last two individuals to abridge the plates. My personal belief is that both Mormon and Moroni were shown us. They were shown our civilization from beginning to end, from stem to stern. So they could actually go to their history, pull out those parts of their history that would be apropos for us. Those things that we needed to know about from that. So it says, and I know that you do walk in the pride of your hearts. Whoops. Let's see. Go back to here. And there are none save only a few who do not lift up themselves in pride and so forth. So they talk about finding apparel and envying and strife and malice and persecutions and all manner of iniquities. He says, in your churches, yea, even every one have become polluted because of the pride of your hearts. Well, clearly he's not talking about us, though, right? Okay, well, we're going to get there in just a second. Okay, but the bottom line is you have this Book of Mormon prophetic parallels timeline. This is from the Stoddards, and this is and essentially because they were shown us, they actually made the Book of Mormon chronologically so that it matches up with the United States. These are parallel histories. The United States of America and the Book of Mormon have history that basically parallels every aspect of it. All the way from when you start off with the Book of Mormon, you have people who are being persecuted because of their religion. They build ships. They come to a promised land in America. When they get here, what do? They form a new form of government, called the Laws of Mosiah and so forth, right? Okay. Well, now if you fast forward to America, basically, you have people who are being persecuted because of their religion. They build ships. They come to a promised land in America. They form a new form of government called the Constitution. You see the parallels there? Then you even have parallels with Joseph Smith and Abinadi. Then you have parallels where you have whole chunks of time are handled in just a few paragraphs. But when you get right up until the time of Christ, then all of a sudden you have this amazing detail, even down to the very letters being written between the military commanders and the prophets and so forth, right? You have Moroni and Peharan and so forth, and you have the letters written back and forth from the from the Gadianton robbers and from the kingmen and so forth. So you have, and this is another interesting aspect of it. Basically, who were the enemies of the Nephites? Primarily, the Lamanites, right? But how often did the Lamanites actually go and instigate a war all on their own to come kill the Nephites? Hardly ever. Usually it was dissenting Nephites, okay, because the Lamanites would get stirred up and then come and do it. Who were some of the other Nephite people that they had to fight? The Gadianton robbers, right? Now, with the Gadianton robbers, were they involved in their government very much? Kinda, but actually they didn't really care so much about the government. They were equal opportunity terrorists, okay? Because they harassed the Lamanites the same as they did the Nephites. They didn't seem to care. As long as the only thing that mattered to them was wealth, was power and money, right? They didn't really even care about power that much. They just wanted to have the money, and they got other people to participate in their spoils, right? Okay, but now who were the kingmen? They were Nephites, but what was their goal? Take over the government, right? So you had three different groups, and sometimes Captain Moroni, he was really pretty concerned because they were having to focus on two of the groups, which were kind of more internal, while their main enemy, the Lamanites, basically they couldn't even worry about them because they were having to worry about the kingmen trying to overthrow their government, and then these scumbag. I think of them kind of like the mafia, okay, or ISIS. These are extra, national organizations. They don't really care about borders and so forth. Their main goal is basically, we're going to do like what most terrorist organizations do. We're going to terrorize a place, and then we will offer you to not be terrorized if you pay us. See how that works? So if you want to not be terrorized, then pay us. And that's how that works. That's how the mafia works. That's how all these. That's basically the secret combination is talking about there. On this scale, we're right before Christ comes.
Right before what?
Christ comes.
Second coming down the bottom?
Yeah. Second coming is basically the Nephites defeat in war. Nephite rejects his signs. More wicked. Christ visits the Nephites right here. Second coming right here. So basically, the more wicked are destroyed. The judgments are coming upon the wicked here. Nephites reject the signs. The moderns are going to reject the signs. The Nephites have defeats in war. We have military defeats, basically, in our, where we don't win the wars. We just kind of fight them, and then the government doesn't even let them really win, right? Okay, so the interesting thing about this is that right before Christ comes, you have all this major detail. And this is what I thought was really fascinating. So what happened was I was looking at, for example, here in Helaman chapter 7. It says, it tells us what's going on in their culture. If the Book of Mormon is a parallel history of us, then wouldn't it be interesting to know how well do we compare, right? And so this is what some of the things that Jesus Christ showed Mormon or Moroni, okay, was happening in their culture right before Christ comes. And so what I did is I took actually each one of these different phrases, take it and put it into a Google search and look under mainstream media headlines. And just to see what would come up if we did that. And I'm telling you what, I was astounded by what was found here. So basically they said that seeing the people in a state of such awful wickedness. We're pretty much getting used to that now in the United States, right? I mean, they actually have stopped kind of covering it because it's just happening all over the place. People are just, it's just happening. This is just a peaceful protest here going on. Okay. This is a few years ago. This is actually in downtown Salt Lake City. The gay parade, the largest gay gathering and parade in the United States, happens in Salt Lake City. These are Mormons building bridges. These are all LDS people fighting for gay rights and so forth, which is interesting. And those Gadianton robbers filling the judgment seats. Whoa. America's political system thrives on corruption. These are some of the articles that came up. Okay, so I'm just kind of showing you what some of those are. U.S. judges see an epidemic of prosecutorial misconduct in the state, L.A. Times. The deep state wears black robes. This is about the Judge Brett Kavanaugh debacle and hearings and so forth, with a completely unsubstantiated assault on his character that even that lady's friends couldn't even back up anything. It's totally a lie. And bottom line is that, so this is the deep states wearing black robes. Having usurped the power and authority of the land, overreaching judges imperil national security and weaken the Constitution, laying aside the commandments of God. Are we doing that? Supreme Court bars commandments from courthouses. Federal judge orders 10 commandments removed from Dixie Courthouse. Oklahoma Supreme Court orders 10 commandments removed. Supreme Court backs removal of 10 commandments monuments. And 8 out of 10 times the commandments monuments have been removed. The only time when they've been actually allowed to remain is, it's a historical document. It has nothing to do with what's good and bad. It has to do with just, it's our history, so let's just keep it up, right? If you were going to destroy the nation under a covenant with God, and if the main thing that nation has to do is obey the commandments, if you were Satan, what would you want to do? Make it so that they can't even remember their end of the deal. So they take away the 10 commandments, right? Okay, so not in the least a right before him. I was wondering what was going to come up when I put that in the Google search. This is what came up. Americans worry about moral decline but can't agree on what's right and what's wrong. Jeez. America's accelerating decay. The steepening decline is evident in the family, education, morality, and art. National Review. Majority of Americans believe the U.S. is in moral decline. From Gallup. And no justice unto the children of men. No justice. I thought, well, if you have a bunch of Gadianton robbers basically in the judgment seats, then that would give you no justice, right? And I thought, well, I wonder what would come up when this happened. And this is what one of the things that came up. Executive branch criminal activities by presidential administration. If you take a look at criminal indictments, criminal convictions, and prison sentences, Barack Obama had 0. George Bush had 16, 16, and 9. Bill Clinton had 1. George Bush had 1. Ronald Reagan had 16, 26, and 8. Okay, so, and Richard Nixon had a whole ton of them. So bottom line is that clearly Republicans break the law a lot more than Democrats do. Unlaw-abiding. Okay. Well, I mean, the fact is right here in front of us, folks. I mean, Republican presidencies have 91 times the convictions of Democratic presidencies. Do you suppose it's because they're 91 times more wicked? Or do you think maybe the judicial system is rigged? In fact, it says Republicans go to jail, Democrats run free. Sanctuary cities. Cities just choosing to ignore the national law. Say, no, that's a law we just don't want to obey. What happens when you get enough people who say, I just don't want to obey a particular law? It's called anarchy, right? They don't want to obey it. So you have all these different people saying we got to defund, the abolish ICE, defund ICE, abolish the police, and so forth. Condemning the righteous because of their righteousness. Wow, is that heaven? Persecution of Christians is on the rise, Americans say, Washington Times. Letting the guilty and the wicked go unpunished because of their money. Now, I was really interested to see what was going to come up with this one. Okay, and this is not necessarily trying to be political, but I mean, the bottom line, this is what came up. And this is ABC News, why Hillary deleted 33,000 emails and still is not behind bars. But you have this other old guy who basically just happens to have said something wrong, or they claim he lied one time to the Congress, and they come out there with 25 SWAT guys in the middle of the night and drag him out of his house and prosecute the crap out of him and so forth, but just for one time lying to Congress, which they do all the time. People, even when you're doing your own testimony, sometimes you forget stuff. You leave one little detail out. In Christ's time, he knew a lot of those lawyers. Basically, he talked about the lawyers trying to trick him by asking him certain questions. There's ways you can question people to get results that basically will contradict. Mm-hmm. And so that's what they're basically trying to do. Justice Department, James Comey deviated from protocol in the Clinton emails probe. How did he deviate? Well, he drafted a statement ending the Clinton email investigation months before he even interviewed her. FBI confirms, Newsweek. Daily Caller, was the Obama Department of Justice weaponized to spy on the Trump campaign? You think? Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah, I mean, all kinds of stuff that they've been coming out. And where are the indictments? Where are these people being thrown in jail? Nobody is. Now, President Trump has had almost 300 new conservative judges. What are they doing? Are they just not getting the cases? What's going on? How come they're not indicting anybody? A politically weaponized FBI is nothing new, but plenty dangerous. Held in office as the head of government to rule and do according to their wills that they might get gain and glory of the world. Get gain and glory of the world. I thought that was an interesting aspect of it. So this is actually the net worth of presidents of the United States. This is Richard Nixon. This is how much he was worth before he was president. This is how much he was worth after. He made 650% increase in his overall wealth. Ford had 400%. Carter had 200%. Reagan had 45% increase in his wealth. Bush had 475%. Here's Clinton. Well, I couldn't get him on the chart here because so I wanted you to be able to see this down here, so I had to then blow it out so you can actually see the chart. Yeah, Bill and Hillary, they managed to get from here. This is their wealth before their presidency to 6,150% increase in their net worth over the course of the presidency. Gee, that's pretty amazing. And Obama's not even on there. This is too old for that. Yeah. Okay, the Washington Post, how the Clintons went from dead broke to rich. Bill earned $104 million just in speeches for 1 year. How Bill and Hillary Clinton made $240 million in the last 15 years. Fortune, how Bill and Hillary Clinton parlayed decades of public service into vast wealth. How much money can ex-presidents pull in? Here's a hint. One increases net worth by 6,150%. Forbes, how Barack Obama has made $20 million since arriving in Washington. That they might the more easily commit adultery. How does that make it more easy to commit adultery? Well, this is interesting. U.S. leads the way in porn production, but falls behind in profits. Despite the fact that estimated 89% of porn is made in the U.S. of A., China, South Korea, and Japan are pulling the most money from it. Kind of ticking off the porn producers here in the U.S. because we're making all the porn, but they're getting all the money from it. Dang it. We're now the greatest purveyor of porn to the world. How we ended up with 40% of children being born out of wedlock. Special report. This is 1 in 4 Americans don't think one-night stands count as cheating. Notice who the news organization is here. Yeah, Deseret News, special report. 25% of Americans think that a one-night stand is not cheating. Wow. About Matt Lauer and his sexual misconduct interviews, Anthony Weiner gets for sexting with a teenager. Is female infidelity on the rise? Says, let's see, drawing the interest of researchers and media lately is the possibility that the percentage of wandering wives is catching up to that of unfaithful husbands. And they actually come up and they actually say, is anyone faithful anymore? Infidelity in the 21st century? And the answer to that is not many. When you have a constant barrage of every TV show and every sitcom that every kid and every adult watches all the time, and there's not one time where they mention anybody being married or waiting until they get married before they have sexual relations, that kind of stuff, that's not even heard anymore.
Just real quick, I heard an interview with the Cosmopolitan main editor, and she said it was mostly all made up in the 70s and 80s, the sexual revolution, making it seem like all these women were having to domesticate. She said, you know, she came out basically and is recounting and saying, you know, horrible, seeing what happened.
Mm-hmm.
These stories that were all false, they're just made up.
Yep. So much lying going on, it's just ridiculous. You have even people like Peter Strzok and Lisa Page who are working basically against the President Trump, or candidate Trump at the time. And what were they doing? They're having a little affair on the side too, right? Okay. That they might more easily commit adultery and steal. So how is stealing going on in the United States? Identity theft hit an all-time high in 2016. Oh, but that was eclipsed in 2017 as it hit a new record high. Oh, but that was eclipsed by 2018 when you had the new record highs. And every year it continues to go up and up and up. It's always a new record high every year for identity theft. It's getting too hard to actually break into people's homes. Well, unless you're rioting, then it makes it a little bit easier. But otherwise, when the cops are around, it's pretty hard to, because people have security systems and so forth now. And then it says to steal and to kill. Actually, killing has been way down. Did you know that? Whoops, come on. After 2 years of increases, the U.S. murder rate officially fell in 2017. Unless you figure into it the abortions. So let's take a look at abortions. So here's Planned Parenthood killed 321,384 babies in abortions last year. And Planned Parenthood celebrates the killing of 7.6 million babies in abortions. FBI signals criminal probe into Planned Parenthood's trafficking of aborted baby parts when they actually got caught selling the aborted baby parts, right? And so forth. And so they paid a total of $7.8 million. You know what part of the budget that is for them? That's a nothing burger for them. That's not even barely even a slap on the wrist for what they did. And doing according to their own wills. Facebook is accused of censoring conservatives, report says. Prairie University's Facebook is ratcheting up its censorship of conservatives. They're not even trying to hide it anymore. They are totally basically censoring all conservatives. I had an opportunity to have about 3 different opportunities to go and talk with Glenn Beck and show him some of the information I'm going to share with you here in the next hour or so. But Glenn basically was just saying, it's just a matter of time before I'm shut down. Yeah. They already try everything they can to try to do it. It's not even, they're just openly doing it now. And they don't care. Okay? Shadow banning, how Twitter secretly censors conservatives. Yet Twitter censoring the President of the United States' tweets. So who has the greater power? That's why we got to watch Glenn's show tonight and find out a little bit more about this these tech companies, because they're all in the can for a new world order. And many of them are actually on the pay of a guy by the name of George Soros, which we're going to talk to you a little bit more also. So, censorship of conservatives is out of control at Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. Social media algorithms suggest internet bias and towards progressive ideologies. Facebook and Twitter and YouTube are all basically censoring conservative stuff. Where do our kids get almost all of their information today? From these platforms. What is the chances that they're going to grow up conservative values? Not unless they basically are getting a boatload of it at home. Because everything they're going to see online is going to be skewed to the progressive side. Everything.
So there could be some really positive things happen when the world gets all crazy.
Yeah. Well, when Christ comes, it's going to get real positive. Well, let's talk about that here in just a second. So Google bosses upset over Trump election victory. These guys were so, when Trump won the presidency 4 years ago, they were just crying that we should have done more. Well, if they saying that they should have done more, what does that say? That they were doing something, right? Okay. Former NPR CEO opens up about liberal media bias. Liberal professors outnumber conservatives 12-1. This study finds. So 12 times more liberal professors than there are conservative ones in our colleges. Higher education is deeper sickness. Okay, this is interesting. Resistance royalty. Pelosi, Soros headline the left's biggest dark money conference. When I say dark money, what does that mean?
Secretive.
Secretive money. Whose money?
Soros.
George Soros. George Soros in 2017 donated $3 billion to progressive causes. That's with a B, not an M, right? It's not a million, that's just $3 billion. But in 2018, he decided he needed to up the ante a little bit, so he was upping it to $18 billion he's given away to progressive groups and progressive causes. But he needs to know who the most progressive causes are and who he's going to give his money to. So he held a big conference where he basically invited all of those who want to feed at his trough, right, to come and basically pitch their best deal as to what they're going to use the money for and how they're going to affect change. This conference was actually called Beyond Resistance. If you're going beyond just resistance, what are you doing? You're talking about just, if I just resist somebody, like if I'm resisting arrest, right? Okay. What happens if I go beyond resisting?
You're attacking.
I'm attacking. Yeah. This is attacking, okay? Exactly. It says reclaiming our progressive future. Okay. And who are some of the speakers? This actually got leaked. It was supposed to be a really secret hush-hush thing. They told everybody, don't even print anything out, just come to the conference, whatever. And somebody actually went in there, somebody actually printed it out, and they got the printing out. And here it is, Beyond Resistance. Here's some of the people who were speakers here at the trough of George Soros, getting his money. John Stocks, DA Board Chair, National Education Association, the NEA. What would one of the highest ranking people in our education system be doing at a George Soros funding event? Oh, man. Let me tell you, brothers and sisters, if you have your kids still in public schools, you need to get them out today. Or they will not have a hope of ever having your values. I hate to put it that way, but I mean, there's people who are not of our faith basically saying, you know what, the United States education system is completely worthless. It'd be better off if they didn't learn most of the stuff that they're learning. And they're not teaching them anymore the basics. They're teaching them how many different ways you can sexually identify yourself. 60-something different ways. Right? This is what they're having to learn and memorize in their classes. Some of this stuff. Okay. Here we have a program, How to Make Climate Progress in the Age of Denial. For people who deny climate change, we got to attack them. These are some of the people and their organizations who do that. They had of course, they had the talk with George Soros. You also had the Honorable Nancy Pelosi from the U.S. House of Representatives was there to get her little piece of the action. Okay. So what is it all about? In fact, I'm going to share with you something that's real important. This is actually something that Glenn Beck dug out, and I had a lot of people asking me questions. Well, where does George Soros, I mean, he's giving away $18 billion. Where do you get that kind of money?
Oh, he shorts the markets. He knows what chaos.
Yeah.
He makes it.
Well, and I thought it was all from his philanthropy stuff and basically his knowledge of the stock market. But there's a lot of smart people out there that play the stock market, and they're not making billions and billions of dollars, enough so they can actually give it away. Where's he getting his money from? Glenn Beck actually answered. If you go to YouTube, it's on. Glenn Beck has a thing. It's called the Democrat Hydra. The Democrat Hydra. And he gives it, outlines step by step how this works. And basically it goes like this. When there were still a few republics left in the world, like Venezuela and Ukraine and so forth, they would identify one of these constitutional republics, basically patterned after the United States Constitution, and they would basically identify countries who had a lot of natural resources. And then they would target that country. And what they would do is Soros would go in, like, let's say $3 billion. They go into Ukraine with $3 billion. They go into the universities and find some progressive liberal students who basically don't like their country or whatever, and they start paying them to go out and have meetings and recruit other students until they get about 20,000 or so students. They have a big group of students. Basically, they're all on kind of the payroll. They're not getting paid much to get something for their meetings and so forth, right? But the bottom line is then they wait till something happens in the country that they can actually protest over. So let's say somebody gets shot or whatever. They try to make it a race thing or a sexual orientation thing or a woman and man thing or whatever. Some way to divide the country up somehow. And then basically then they tell them, okay, now you guys got to go out and you got to protest. But you can't just protest because that doesn't get on the news. You got to get on the news or you don't get paid. Okay, so they'll go out and shut down an airport or shut down a freeway or do something to tick people off enough that it causes the news to come out and say, what's going on? Well, when people start seeing us on the news every night, night after night, they go, man, I didn't realize it was such a problem in our country. But it must be because, gosh, you got these riots, these not riots necessarily, but these protests going on all over the place. So then they kind of start feeling like, well, gosh, maybe we should join in the thing because, I don't want to discriminate. I don't want to be a discriminator person. So I'm going to go join the deal. Well, as they do this, they start to get it more and more radicalized until they actually do start having real riots and so forth. And then they start to destabilize their biggest cities. They start to shut down the commerce. Why are big cities there? Because that's where the commerce happens, right? So they try to shut down and get people to stop coming in there and so forth. And basically, after you get a certain number of cities, it starts to destabilize their currency. Oh, and then they've got an answer for them, right? So what happens is as soon as their currency starts to get destabilized and it starts to go radically going up and down, then they basically come in and say, listen, your currency is really unstable. We're going to fix that. We're the World Bank. And we're going to come in here and we're going to guarantee your currency. We're going to guarantee the loans. But you got to have some kind of collateral. What kind of collateral do you have? Oh, you have natural resources. Oh, it's too bad because the natural resources, they're in the hands of the private sector. You have companies and people who own that stuff. The oil and the gas and the coal and so forth. Tell you what, just nationalize that stuff, put it all into one organization, and then you can use that as the collateral to back your loans to stabilize your currency. Boom, everything's fixed. All you have to do is just nationalize all your natural resources. The company that they chose to have the one that would actually do that and oversee that in Ukraine is called Burisma. You ever heard of Burisma? Who's on the board of Burisma?
Hunter Biden.
Well, Hunter Biden has so much wonderful experience in oil and gas and Ukrainian culture and so forth, right? Why are they paying him millions of dollars every year for his expertise when he has none?
Pay to play.
Yeah. Okay, I mean, you can figure that one out. That's not too hard to figure out, right? So bottom line, so what happens? So they basically milk the country's wealth through their natural resources, which is basically where everything comes from. Because this is what God put into the ground. And everything stems from what God put into the ground. Everything. Right? So when you control that, basically you control all of that. And so George Soros, for his paltry $3 billion investment to get all those kids on the hook and get them to go out and riot and so forth, he's receiving back $300 billion in guarantees from the Burisma back to him and the World Banking Consortium. So all that is outlined by Glenn Beck. He's awesome, but it's called the Democrat Hydra. That's where he's getting his money from, folks, and we need to understand where this is happening. Okay. Well, with that kind of money, I mean, yeah, you can buy anything. You can buy all kinds of stuff. But that's not. But the real estate isn't what's making his big thing. Show me any real estate deals that are getting, from $3 billion to $300 billion. That's a what's that? 1,000% increase. I mean, show me a real estate deal where you can get 1,000% return in 1 or 2 years. Not happening. All right. So amid Google scandal, Soros-backed plan to censor the web. Executive branch overreach. Where's the judges? Obama's curtain call. Look back at the legacy of executive overreach. President shouldn't set Congress the agenda. We no longer have 3 branches of government because they're all overstepping each other. They're not clearly defined anymore. And last thing, and this great iniquity had come upon the Nephites in the space of not many years. And where did it actually come from? I speak unto you as if you were present. You remember Christ showed in this, right? You walk in the pride of your hearts. You find a peril, envy, and strife, persecutions, iniquities, and so forth. Let's get to the timeline. Okay, this is about the sex scandals within the church there. Do you need to go into this one? You love your money and your substance, and you find a peril. This is from Mormon. This one is real important. He says, "O ye pollutions, ye hypocrites." This is a couple of verses after he just got through saying that Jesus Christ has shown you unto me, and I know you're doing, right? What did Christ show him? Christ showed him this. He says, "O ye pollutions, ye hypocrites, ye teachers, who sell yourselves for that which will canker. Why have ye polluted the holy church of God?" Whoa, now wait just a minute here. Who was the holy church of God? I don't think he's talking about the Baptists here. So who was the holy church of God? And he didn't say it might get polluted. He said it has been polluted. And who showed it to him? Christ. This is an interesting question. Who did the polluting? Who was it? He tells us. The teachers who sell themselves. If you're selling yourself, well, you're getting paid, right? For that which will canker. What kind of things canker? Things that don't last canker. Swords that were made out of steel, they canker with rust, right? So these are things that don't last. So these are people who are getting paid to teach stuff that aren't going to last, which means it's not from God. It's the precepts of men. They said nothing about the brethren here, but there's somebody who is in this holy church of God that is actually causing a loss. Basically, that they're polluting it, right? So I'm not going to say, yeah, I'll let you figure out who you think that is. But I don't think it's the gospel doctrine teachers because number one, they're not getting paid. Okay, and I don't think it's there's lots of people there. I think something's going crazy there. All right, this next part though says why. Okay, this is so awesome, but I don't think we have time to really go over it. So we'll just have to, if you want to take a picture of it, whatever, that's fine. But this is a talk that President Nelson did. He basically said we have to understand the creation, the fall, and the atonement. We can't understand the atonement without first understanding the fall, and we can't understand the fall unless we understand the creation. Creation is really important, right? Yeah.
Who are those teachers? The Pharisees?
I'm going to have you figure it out. I'll just tell it this way. They're people who are members of the church because they're obviously part of the holy church of God, right? They're getting paid and they're teaching stuff that's not true. I mean, okay. I'm not going there because it's not just BYU. I mean, but bottom line, there are scholars who are getting paid to teach the philosophies of men, not even mingled with Scripture. Okay, and I'll just put it that way. Okay, that's my personal opinion, though. Okay, so. Well, no. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I'm just telling you that, and most of you probably already know that there's major things going on. If you have any kids or grandkids going to even BYU or really any of these schools, many of them are still taught by, LDS professors and so forth. But they're being taught that Adam and Eve weren't real, that basically the earth is not as the Book of Mormon, or as the creation accounts talk about, that Noah's flood didn't really happen, that we came from apes and slime and lower life forms through the process of evolution. They're being taught socialism and communism and basically every other kind of ism besides constitutionalism. Okay, and so these are all things that are going on even within our own universities here in Utah. And of course, it's even worse. Well, it's not even worse. I got to tell you. Well, I'll tell you in just a second because I'm going to get to that point here. But this is another thing though that actually reiterates that President Nelson, he totally gets all this. Okay, this is a talk that he gave. He said the Book of Mormon reveals that the inheritance of Joseph's side of Israel was not forgotten when land was distributed to the tribes of Israel as promised in the Abrahamic covenant. Joseph didn't get the inheritance, right? This is President Nelson is reiterating that. He didn't get an inheritance of land over there. He says Joseph's inheritance was to be a land choice above all other lands. It was choice not only because of its beauty or wealth of natural resources, but it was choice because it was chosen to be the repository of sacred writings on gold plates from which the Book of Mormon would one day come. And where did the Book of Mormon come forth out of the ground? Mesoamerica, okay. Okay. But this land it was choice because it would eventually host the world headquarters of the restored Church of Jesus Christ in the latter days. And where is that? Salt Lake City. And it is choice because it is the land of liberty by those who worship the Lord and do what? Keep his commandments. All throughout the Book of Mormon, you keep my commandments, you'll prosper on the land. You keep my commandments, you're gonna, you'll have posterity and so forth, right? It's all throughout the Book of Mormon. The covenant is over and over and over again, and he tells us exactly what we need to do, but we're not really doing it. I love this quote. This is. What's that? Actually, almost all of his talks that he's done well, not all of them, but probably 70% of his talks that he's done when he was going all over the place. Just look up any of those talks. They're all pretty similar, and most of them have that in it. He said it over and over and over again. This is not like a one-time deal. It's not a one-off deal, okay? I don't know if you've seen this or not. This is Hugh Nibley. He says, we have met here today. This is at a graduation ceremony at BYU. We met here today clothed in the black robes of a false priesthood. How many of you ever heard that one before? How many of you have heard the rest of what he said? This is so awesome. Okay, he says, most of you are here today only because you believe that this charade will help you get ahead in the world. In a forgotten time, before the Spirit was exchanged for the office and inspired leadership for ambitious management, these robes were designed to represent withdrawal from the things of this world, as the temple robes still do. That we may become more fully aware of the real significance of both is my prayer. That is so profound, right? Then a couple of years ago, we had my friend Dean Sessions with the Universal Model. I actually ran a full-page ad about our expo going on in the Daily Universe at BYU. And basically, this is the response that we had the week after that, in the next edition. This is a response to just one person that I was showing that was going to be speaking at our conference, and it's from everybody from here on down. These are all their credentials: PhD, geology master's degree students and faculty and so forth, and they're all taking huge umbrage. And basically, this is what it comes down to. This is a direct quote from their article in the Daily Universe. It says, students in the BYU community reminded that organic evolution, anthropogenic climate change, radiometric dating, and a 4.56 billion year old age of the earth are all seriously taught on campus by professors in good standing with the church in fields directly related to these subjects. Daily Universe, this is really interesting. They had a poll to see who would win if among these particular candidates right here. Bernie Sanders. If the poll were, if you were to vote for in the general presidential election today, who would you vote for? at BYU, Bernie Sanders would have won by a landslide victory over Marco Rubio, Ben Carson, Ted Cruz, Hillary Clinton, and Donald Trump down here. Okay? Okay? This is actually what's the Wasatch Socialist Party Workers Unite. And they're saying BYU students vote and overwhelmingly prefer Bernie! Exclamation point. What has happened? Because I guarantee you that most of these parents are probably, most of the parents taking sending their kids to BYU are not socialists. So what's going on here? This is called the Heaven and Earth Conference. And we didn't hustle through this. This is basically BYU. By the way, all this stuff is available on the DVD. It's called Book of Mormon, Current as the Daily News. Everything I've got to this point is that, but we're going to run out of time. So we got to hustle through. Oh man, we are going to run out of time. Okay. So the objectives of BYU evolution basically is to get the kids to believe it. The belief in literal Adam and Eve and so forth is higher than that. They go, what? Okay, so I gotta leave that one in there. This is at their conference, okay? This is Stephen Pack. Okay. I didn't notice the first time. It was pretty funny. Okay. Yeah. But so this is basically they're having this big evolution love fest, and I hate to put it this way, but I think I see the crack in their theory. But yeah, so actually about 2 weeks after this big event happened at UVU, it was actually sponsored by BYU, but they held it at UVU. I'm not sure why they didn't have it at BYU, but they didn't. Anyways, bottom line, so they interviewed the same guy, this Professor Peck at BYU, and from Newsweek, this is on the front page of Newsweek right here, is Evolution Real? Christians should embrace Darwin's theories, Mormon college professor says. BYU's gotten so good at converting our kids from their belief in creation and what the Lord said to evolution that 100% of the graduating class of the biology department at BYU in the last 3 or 4 years has been, they self-identify as evolutionists. The students graduating do.
How did they deal with 2222 in the Book of Mormon? 2222. 2 Nephi 2:22. There was no procreation before Adam.
They have ways of looking at it, and believe me, yeah, they have ways of dealing with all this different stuff. And let me tell you though, so this spring they had a big conference lined up to have about 10 other universities that are Christian universities to come and have BYU teach them how they can get their kids to ignore creation and so forth from the Bible and believe in evolution and how they can kind of reconcile those two together. So now they're out there teaching other Christian denominations how they can get their kids to believe in apes and slime as our ancestors instead of Adam and Eve. So it's a really interesting aspect of it. We don't have time to jump in the middle of this real quick, but that's basically what he's talking about. Don't have time to go into that. Anybody been picking up on the fact that BYU has a statue on it of a known racist? They had a whole bunch of BYU students basically say, we can't be having a racist statue on our property. You know who the racist is? Brigham Young. Yeah. All right. You teachers, why are you ashamed to take upon you the name of Christ? I love that. President Nelson basically tells us to use the full proper name of the church. Because of the praise of the world. But we're not getting much praise of the world nowadays. We're not getting much love. This is religious ratings of religious groups vary more widely among older than younger Americans. So this is basically 65 years and older. These are what they call their warmth degree, or what they call it, the warmth factor or something like that. In other words, their positivity rating, basically. Okay. So mainline Protestants rank the highest: Jews, Catholics, evangelical Christians, Mormons, Buddhists, Hindus, and down here at the bottom is Muslims and atheists in the 65-year-old and up group. But according to millennials, 18 to 29, Buddhism ranks highest. Catholics and Hindus are here. Jews, atheists, and evangelical Christians are here. Mainline Protestants, Muslims, and, oh yeah, coming up in last place is Mormons. So it's not working so well if you're trying to impress the rest of the world, because it's not happening. So the growth of the church falls to its lowest levels in 80 years. The growth of the church, this is, people talk about, sometimes I've had this thrown in my face, well, wait a minute, but, the Book of Mormon had to happen down in Central America because it's growing like crazy down there, right? I mean, there's so many baptisms and everybody's, in Guatemala and so forth. I mean, it's just, that's the Book of Mormon lands, right? So you should have all this growth of all these Lamanites down there joining the church. This, I don't know if you knew this or not, but this is in 2018. They 7 stakes and 53 wards and branches were discontinued in Mexico and Guatemala area. This is Mexico here. That's the list of the stakes that were discontinued. Mormon growth slow in the U.S. Mormon growth continues slow. This is actually the numbers, percentage growth, 2013, a paltry 2% growth. 1.9, 1.7, 1.5, 1.4. Every year it's less and less. Why is that? That's an important question. That's the biggest question the brethren have on their mind and on their hearts. Why is this happening? Now we're going to get into the last day stuff because that's going to answer to some extent what's going on here, okay? I'll just put it this way. Is this because we are not doing the missionary work effectively? Is it because we are not living the gospel fully? Possibly. Is it because the world is rejecting all things godly? I think it's the last thing. Mostly. I mean, I think all of it actually plays into it. But I think that the world is rejecting God. And no matter what our missionaries do, they're not going to be able to overcome it when everything around these people are coming from satanic sources, right? Okay, if this is from 2 Nephi. If it shall be because of iniquity, okay, it says, wherefore they shall never be brought down into captivity, but if so, it'll be because of iniquity. For if iniquity shall abound, cursed shall be the land for their sakes. Behold, I say unto you, as if you're, if you persist in your wickedness, that your days shall not be prolonged in the land. For the Lamanites shall be sent upon you, they shall come in a time when you know not, you shall be visited with utter destruction. And it shall be according to the fierce anger of the Lord. Alma chapter 60. Behold, it is time, yea, the time is now at hand, brothers and sisters, that except we do bestir ourselves in the defense of our country and our little ones. Man, that hit me so hard. It's not just about our country, but also it's about our posterity. It's about our little ones. We have riots in the street going on if one person gets shot by a police officer and he's at the wrong color. But yet every day thousands of children are torn out from their mother's wombs, and we don't even bat an eyelash. We're not down there picketing and rioting in front of these places and demanding that all child's lives matter. Now, sword of justice doth hang over you, yea, and it shall fall upon you and visit you even to your utter destruction. That's what Alma said, okay? All right, so now this is interesting. It talks about the Gadianton robbers. The Lamanites actually fought off this band of robbers until they basically utterly destroyed them from among the Lamanites. So the Lamanites weren't having any of it. Said, you know what? You're going to do this stuff? We're taking you out. And they did. They took them out of the woodshed and whooped up on them, apparently, because they kicked them out. It came to pass, on the other hand, the Nephites did build them up and support them, until they had overspread all the land of the Nephites and seduced the more part of the righteous, until they'd come down to believe in their works and partake in their spoils and join with them in their secret murders and combinations. And thus they did obtain the sole management of the government. They did trample under their feet and smite and rend and turn their backs upon the poor and the meek and the humble followers of God. So who did they turn their backs upon when they got control of the government? The poor and the meek and those who follow God. So who are these people today? They're trying to get power. We are seeing it in these poor cities. And I hate, and it's time, bottom line, I try not to be political because I'm an independent, basically, okay? Because I don't think either side is conservative enough for what I feel like, okay? But bottom line is that these Democrat-run cities that have been run by Democrats for years and years, the people are poor by far and away. And then you have people like I love that mayor of Chicago. She lets the poor places in her city just go to hell literally hell every night, gunshots and all kinds of stuff. Nobody dares to come out of their homes. But she wants to defund their police department so they have less police help and all this stuff. Oh, but not for her neighborhood. Oh, I have to have protection because I'm the mayor.
And it's Trump.
The hypocrisy is absolutely just jaw-dropping. You just wonder, how can anybody... I almost wonder why people don't raise up and go to her home and drag her out in the street and give her a good horse whipping. Okay, but I don't know why, but anyway, whatever. Yeah, so, and thus we see that they were in an awful state and ripening for an everlasting destruction. You know, I'm not condoning, we don't want to have anybody doing that kind of stuff, but I'm just surprised that if people are willing to basically go down and breathe in, tear gas and so forth for their cause, I mean, whatever. But anyway, it's interesting. They were in an awful state and ripening for everlasting destruction. And this is interesting. There were many children who did grow up and began to wax strong in years, okay? And they became for themselves. What do you think that means? They became for themselves. They basically got old enough to be kind of on their own, right? Okay, so these are kind of adults, young adults, right? And were led away by some who were Zoramites, by their lyings and their flattering words, to join the Gadianton robbers. And thus were the Lamanites afflicted also, and began to decrease as to their faith and their righteousness. Why? Because of the wickedness of the rising generation. We have the greatest generation of socialists coming out of our school systems that has ever been known in the promised land of America. And in fact, Robin Openshaw, she was talking just the other day at a rally thing, and she said her own kids basically are just hammering her, and so forth, about these things. Parents are being told by their kids, your ways are just wrong. We have to accept the socialist ideologies, and that's the best way to go, and that's the future of America, and they're telling their parents how it's going to be. And they really believe, they've been told that they'll be able to overthrow us, right? The rest of us. Yeah, exactly what happened there. And then it said it defiance the laws and the rights of their country, to covenant one with another, to destroy the governor. Does that sound familiar? And establish a king over the land. Somebody who would basically rule without any opposition, right? That the land should no more be at liberty, but should be subject unto kings.
There's great news for all of you annual subscribers to the Book of Mormon Evidence streaming site. You receive $15 discount on our upcoming virtual conference starting April 9th. And everyone that registers gets a free Hebrew in the Heartland 2-hour bonus presentation by Ron Meldrum. Watch online anytime, anywhere, on any electronic device. And thank you to all of you for listening and watching so we can keep creating new exciting content that uplifts, educates, and inspires. Don't miss the 27th International Book of Mormon Evidence Conference. Virtual tickets on sale at bookofmormonevidencestreaming.com. Viewing begins April 9th.
Hi, I'm Rod Meldrum, and I want to welcome you to the 27th International Book of Mormon Evidence Conference, and it's also part of the Firm Foundation Expo. Folks, if you have been watching this research and seen this unfold over the last number of years, last year, as you know, in April, we had to go virtual. Virtual actually has turned out to be a pretty good way to do a conference because it allows you to have full access to everything. In these previous conferences, we've had 5 or 6 speakers at the same time, and if you didn't go to the one that you wanted, or if you couldn't get into the one that you wanted, then you weren't able to see that. We've eliminated that. We can see every single speaker, stop and take care of other things if you want to, and resume again when you want to, all in the streaming video site. So I want to encourage you to come and join us for our 3rd virtual expo. This is going to be in the 27th International Book of Mormon Evidence Conference. We have some amazing speakers coming up for you, incredible new research. I know Wayne May and many others have gotten a lot of new things that they're going to be sharing with you. So if you'd like to join us,
And also, you'll have access to most of all our previous conferences and all the talks and the presentations that have been done there. It is the largest repository of information and research on the Book of Mormon that's ever been assembled. So please join us, come and check out the expo, and I think you're going to really enjoy it.
Don't miss the 27th International Book of Mormon Evidence Conference. Viewing begins April 9th. Yearly subscribers get a $15 discount at bookofmormonevidencestreaming.com.